Hi, I'm Charlene Theodore, and I'll be your host for this installment of the OBA Foundation video series focusing on working with a real estate lawyer. Today I'm joined by real estate lawyers Ray LeClaire and Georgia Wolf. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Good morning, Charlene.
Good morning. So my first question is, what would you want to discuss with a client at the initial meeting?
Well, for many clients, what lawyers do is a complete mystery, and this is particularly true for first-time home buyers. So the most important thing that you can do for a client is to demystify the legal process, to explain at the outset what you will be doing for the client, what they can expect, what is expected of them, and how the transaction is going to progress. And the first thing that any client wants to know is, what will this cost me? So you want to discuss the anticipated legal fees and disbursements, and after that you want to review land transfer taxes, municipal land transfer taxes if the property's in Toronto, and the non-resident speculation tax, or the NRST. And specifically, the NRST adds an additional 15% tax for foreign buyers of residential property containing at least one and not more than 6 single-family residences in Toronto, and more generally the greater Golden Horseshoe area.
And Georgia, a part of the land transfer tax is actually the rebates that would be available. You have to consider that for provincial land transfer tax, a maximum rebate of $4,000 is available, and for the Toronto land transfer tax, a maximum of $4,475 for many first-time home buyers. You want to ballpark the total funds that are going to be required to close and the source of those funds to ensure that they are available on the day of closing. Most of those funds are coming from a mortgage, and so you'll want to get information as to what company they're dealing with, what the interest rate is, what type of mortgage it is, and you also want to obtain their contact information for the lender so that you can follow up with them. You should know that, or you should let clients know when the keys will be available to be released to them on the closing date.
And you want to remind the client to arrange for the setup of utilities. You want to discuss make sure that the client's available before closing so that they're around to sign the purchase documents. And you want to talk about how the client wants to use the property. So for example, is it a rental? Is it a tear down? Is there a swimming pool, etc.? You want to let the client know that the home has to be insured for closing, and they need a binder letter from their insurance agent. And of course, funds to close need to be certified.
Well, what other legal matters would you want to discuss with the client?
One of the important considerations is title insurance, what that is and how it works. The lawyer should be explaining to you the options that are available from the various title insurance products on the market. You'll want to identify the marital status of the client and who, in fact, will be taking title to the property. If there's more than one purchaser, you'll want to discuss as to how they're taking title, as to whether it's joint tenants or as tenants in common. And of course, the legal importance of or distinction of these types of taking title. You'll also want to discuss as to, or understand if the client is a Canadian resident and how this will impact them. The non-resident speculation tax that Georgia has already mentioned will apply to the purchase transaction. You'll want to define as to whether they're resident or non-resident because that needs to be disclosed to the Minister of Finance in connection with every residential purchase transaction in Ontario. Lastly, when the client will be selling the property down the road, the client, if they're non-resident, will need to obtain a Section 116 Income Tax Act non-residence clearance certificate from Canada Revenue Agency in order to facilitate the closing of the sale.
A new condo or home is often conditional on a solicitor's review of the purchase agreement, and if so, your lawyer will need some time to review the purchase documents and to report back to you. An existing condo purchase is typically conditional on a review of the condo status certificate, which the condo corporation delivers. And also keep in mind that a lawyer's review of condo documents is for legal issues. Clients themselves need to review these documents for lifestyle issues such as pets, use of balconies, etc., or ask your lawyer to specifically look for these issues.
If you're looking at an existing home, there are many things to be ascertained. Is the property presently tenanted? Does the client expect to bring in tenants? Will the client be personally occupying the property? If the home is very old, an important consideration as to whether or not the client wants a lawyer to obtain a building department search. Is there a swimming pool on the property? Is the home rural or cottage property? Is the home near a body of water or conservation area? Is it vacant land? All of these have important considerations on the searches that may be undertaking. If there's a survey to the property, it's very important for the lawyer to review it with the client. They should look at it together to identify the features. In fact, a good practice is even to look at the aerial view from Google Maps and see how much the actual property or the property today has changed from the survey that they're looking at.
So the next question is, what do lawyers actually do behind the scenes?
Well, your lawyer searches the title to the property, which shows who owns the property, whether there are any mortgages to be discharged, if anyone else has the right to use the property, if there are any lawsuits against the seller which affect title and which are known as executions, and more generally, if there are any other problems which affect title. And after the title search is completed, your lawyer will prepare a requisition letter and draft closing documents and will send these to the seller's solicitor for review. And also other off-title searches might be performed. For example, a tax certificate can be obtained from the Realty Tax Department to confirm the amount of the taxes and whether there are any arrears.
As we know, Georgia, the lawyers are very busy behind the scenes. They will be ordering an up-to-date condominium status certificate to be able to identify if any information that the client doesn't know at this point. They'll be getting instructions from the mortgage lender and as to how the mortgage is to be prepared. The lawyer will prepare the mortgage and any related documents at that time. And the lawyer should contact the title insurer at this point to arrange for the title insurance policy that will be issued in favor of both the purchaser and the lender, and in fact review the draft policy that will be issued after closing.
Your lawyer will also prepare a draft of Form 5.0.1 under the Land Transfer Tax Act. And this is the form that contains the reporting requirements for residential transactions in Ontario. And it provides the Ontario Minister of Finance with information on the purchasers, their residency, country of origin, information on the type of home acquired, whether or not it's a rental, etc. And your lawyer also will review the draft statement of adjustments and calculate the estimated balance to close, and then we'll let you know how much money you have to bring.
So what actually happens at sign-up?
The sign-up itself should not be approached as a sign here type of situation. There's a lot of documentation and a lot of information to go through, and at that time it becomes a balancing act for the lawyer. How much do you explain to the client about the documents they're signing? Obviously enough so that they understand the document, the actual document that is in front of them at that time, but not to overwhelm them with all of the information that's available on closing. Of the transfer itself, the lawyer is looking to make sure that the purchaser's name is spelled correctly. Their dates of birth are properly set down. The address for service, so where the legal notices they will be receiving, is correct. If there's more than one purchaser, again, the lawyer will take time to review as to how clients is taking title, either as joint tenants, which most spouses do, or as tenants in common.
With the mortgage, the lawyer will review the principal amount of the mortgage, the interest rate, the payment amount and frequency, whether the mortgage is open or closed for prepayment, whether the interest rate is a fixed rate or a variable rate. And the main point is to ensure that the mortgage being registered reflects what the client actually expects, because occasionally you will find that the client was looking for something very different in terms of a mortgage, and it's always best to determine this before closing. Your lawyer will also review the statement of adjustments and the closing costs in detail. And the lawyer is going to look at the realty taxes in the statement of adjustments and discuss it with you and what this means in terms of future realty tax payments after closing. And condo maintenance fees and tenant rentals, if applicable, will also be reviewed.
Your lawyer will review with you Form 5.01 under land transfer tax with you for accuracy. The buyer is actually certifying this information to the Minister of Finance, and so it's important to ensure the disclosure is accurate. The land transfer tax actually requires purchasers to keep the transaction records in Ontario, and it's important to underline that in Ontario for a period of 7 years. And so the client should be fully aware of this obligation. At this time is also, again, a good time if you're buying a home or a condo to review a copy of the survey or the condominium plan to make sure the unit or the home is actually what the client expects to be buying. Occasionally you will find a mix-up with the legal description, and it's best to identify these errors before the registration and the full closing of the transaction.
So what happens on the day of closing and also after that?
Well, on the day of closing, your lawyer will draw on the funds received from you and your mortgage lender, and the balance due on closing, as provided in the Statement of Adjustments, will be delivered to the vendor's solicitor in order to close, and then keys and documents will also be exchanged. Your lawyer will then conduct sub-searches of title and executions, and if everything looks good, will register the transfer and any mortgages. And after that, you are officially the owner of the property, and then keys will be made available to you. And then after closing, your lawyer will notify the tax department, report to your lender, and if it's a condo purchase, will notify the condo corporation of the closing.
Also, the lawyer will be issuing that title insurance policy that we discussed that was obtained at that time for the purchaser and the lender. The lawyer will prepare and deliver to both the purchaser and the lender a reporting letter, and the reporting letter should contain all relevant documents to that transaction. The balance of any monies in a lawyer's trust account should be returned to the purchaser at that time after along with a final accounting. And finally, undertakings, because not everything will be completed as it should be on the day of closing. There may be some things that need to be done after, and so there are undertakings that are exchanged. And one of the principal ones for the vendor's lawyer is to discharge the mortgage, and you'll want to follow up on that and to diarize it for later verification.
Anything else clients should know?
Well, time doesn't permit us to discuss all of the potential matters. So, for example, a newly built home, a vacant property, a tenanted property, a tear-down property, they all raise very different issues. Also, a purchase by anyone other than a single person or a married couple raises some interesting questions. But as a final thought, I think clients should be encouraged to speak to a lawyer very early in the transaction process, ideally before the purchase agreement is signed.
And Charlene, if I can emphasize on that last point Georgia makes, it's the dialogue between the lawyer and the client is very important. The client should feel at ease of asking questions of their lawyer. There should be open discussion about the transaction to make sure that the most exchange of information is available at that time, and that the best results are obtained.
That's very helpful information. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.